My name is Clara Wilkins, a 10-year-old girl who lives in the charming little town of Hillcrest Valley. I like to think of myself as a fun-loving kid with a sprinkle of imagination. I enjoy drawing, and my friends say I have a knack for solving puzzles in ways that others might miss. But the world does not always seem to be as bright as the colors in my crayon box. No, not in fourth grade. In my classroom, the light tends to flicker, overshadowed by the towering presence of a teacher who seems to have cast a long shadow over my experiences. My math teacher, Mrs. Thompson, is a small woman with a big personality, and she has a peculiar way of showing favoritism that has turned my school life into a series of uphill battles. Mrs. Thompson is hyper-religious, always carrying around an aura that radiates both love and judgment. If you cross her path in any way, you better watch out because she does not hesitate to label you the villain as she treads down on her righteous path. The villain in my story is Eugene, a bully in our fourth grade class adored by Mrs. Thompson for reasons I could never quite understand. He always got the best grades in math, even though I often helped him with his homework. Mrs. Thompson never seemed to notice how he would shove me and other kids in our class around, nor did she recognize the bruises he left on my heart. Instead, every time a confrontation erupted, he would use his charm to sway the teacher's opinion, and I would be left feeling like the odd one out. During recess, I was the target of his taunts and crude remarks. He relished watching me flinch when he cornered me, his smug grin lighting up his otherwise unremarkable face. My few small victories against him would usually end up in me being scolded by Mrs. Thompson, who would look at me with disappointment. Then, one fateful day in gym class, things escalated to a point I could not have foreseen. The gym was filled with the shouts and laughter of kids playing tag, but Eugene's relentless bullying found its way into my corner of the world. This time, he shoved me hard, and the force knocked me to the floor. I felt anger boiling in my chest, the unfairness of it all igniting a fire inside me. I was tired of being the devil in Mrs. Thompson's eyes. In a moment driven by sheer adrenaline, I swung my arm, which was still in a cast from a previous incident, and lunged at him. My cast collided with his arm, and the gym teacher rushed over and pulled me back just in time, scolding me and demanding an explanation. I felt the gaze of my classmates as they watched, some in disbelief, others barely able to hide their laughter. Later, Mrs. Thompson's sharp words cut into me once again, and I found myself standing in front of her desk, my heart thudding in my chest. She looked down her nose at me, shaking her head as if I had committed the worst sin, which in her eyes it seemed I had. "Clara, how could you?" she fumed. "You are nothing but a devil to everyone around you." Her words stung sharper than a bee's sting, and for the rest of that day, all I could think about was how deeply unfair it was for a child to be labeled such a term simply for defending myself. Thoughts spiraled within me. What kind of person was she to enjoy demeaning a child so publicly and ridiculing her for standing up to a bully? Fueled by a mix of emotions, anger, frustration, and a growing desire for revenge, I resolved that I would not remain a victim in this story. While I didn't know yet what that revenge would look like, one thing was clear. I needed to show everyone that Mrs. Thompson was wrong about me. The following weeks swirled into a whirlwind of planning and plotting. I started gathering information. I had a burning desire to prove Mrs. Thompson right in a way that would flip her judgment upside down. A thrill coursed through me as I considered the options. I needed to gather a list of things Mrs. Thompson would absolutely detest, things that would surely ruffle her feathers. I dedicated my evenings, seeking out online psychic services, tarot reading websites, and even mediums that claimed to have a connection to the spirit world. The very thought of signing her up for everything I found brought a wicked smile to my face. I imagined her reactions, her eyes widening in disbelief, her voice rising an octave as she screamed at her computer screen. Before long, I had a whole list ready for action. Once I felt prepared, I took the plunge. Knowing she primarily used her school-issued email for work, I signed her up for every single service I had collected. I could hardly contain my excitement while typing in her email and clicking the confirmation buttons. With every click, I pictured her righteous fury as she received a flood of nonsensical subscriptions. I knew I needed to be careful. Being a child with limited means, I had to work stealthily. I became the little shadow that slipped through the cracks, but also the mastermind of my small, calculated revolution. The thrill of knowing I had power, even if it was just a little, filled me with a sense of satisfaction. As days passed and the subscriptions started rolling in, I could hardly keep the smile off my face. Each time I saw Mrs. Thompson, I positioned myself in front of her, as sweet as honey and charming enough to make her think I had turned over a new leaf, a true angel. I focused on her expressions, learning to read her as well as she believed she could read me. With each interaction, she smiled hesitantly back, still wary of me, the devil in her eyes but perhaps seeing a flicker of sweetness where only bitterness thrived before. Meanwhile, Eugene's grades began to slip. For the first time, I could see the slight tremors of fear in Mrs. Thompson's eyes as she wandered closer to his desk during exams, casting concerned looks his way. I would feign innocence while I helped Eugene with his math, much to his dismay. "You are so dumb, Clara. Why can't you just help me properly?" He would whine one day during our study session. Each time he looked to me for guidance, I would twist the explanations just enough to confuse him and watch his frustration grow with glee blossoming in my chest. The joy was bittersweet. I was lifting myself higher with every little victory while simultaneously dragging him down. Each time his confidence cracked, Mrs. Thompson's fury was redirected towards him, leaving her without excuses to justify her favorite. Even the snacks I shared were like sugar-coated traps. The more he relied on me, the more unrealistic his expectations became. I watched how Mrs. Thompson would get more agitated when he would fail, occasionally pacing around her desk like a caged animal. It was as if every piece of my plan slowly unfolded like a flower blooming in spring. I felt powerful, more so than I ever had before. One day, however, the tides turned. While lingering after school to eavesdrop on conversations, I overheard Mrs. Thompson chatting with another teacher. "I do not know what has happened to that boy," she sighed. "He could do so much better if he just applied himself. Clara is driving him crazy with her antics." The way she curled her lip when she said my name felt like a slap in the face. For a moment, I considered abandoning my plot, my heart heavy with guilt. But the thought vanished quickly. No, I would not quit now. My 10-year-old heart sparked with defiance. Fueled by the challenge, I decided to kick things into an even higher gear. I learned how to manipulate every situation further. I began planting tiny seeds of doubt in Eugene's mind. Whenever he doubted himself during an assignment, I would sweetly nudge him towards thinking that perhaps he really was as incapable as he felt. If I sensed Mrs. Thompson becoming frustrated with him, I would angle my own unwitting charm toward her, feigning concern for Eugene and saying dramatic statements like, "I do not think he is trying." I hoped she would connect the dots to believe her golden boy was failing due to his own shortcomings, and not my calculated mischief. But things began to unravel, too many threads woven together until it became a tangled web. I found myself slipping into paranoia, worrying that my schemes would be discovered. I still felt euphoric at the thought of my victory against her, yet the fear of being caught twisted a knot deep in my stomach. Then, I overheard whispers from other kids. Eugene had been talking about how I had misled him, planting doubt within our circle of friends. My heart raced like a runaway horse. My actions were eroding my friendships, but the need for revenge spoke louder than that nagging voice. That same week, the backlash came like a wave crashing against the shore. Eugene cornered me one afternoon after school, puffed up with a righteous fury I had never seen in him. "You are messing with things you do not understand, Clara," he shouted, his eyes wild with desperation. "You are going to pay for this, you hear me." I could see how scared he was, but all I felt was a sense of triumph, a twisted satisfaction bubbling up inside me. But as it often happens when one dabbles in chaos, the situation turned ugly. Mrs. Thompson had called a meeting for all parents, and before I could even start plotting my escape, I was summoned to the principal's office. My stomach dropped as I recognized that there was no running from the unraveling threads any longer. In a rekindling of the fear I had felt in those early days, I sat in a plush chair, my heart racing as I waited. I could see pity and concern in Mrs. Thompson's eyes. She looked worried about how this inquiry might turn back on her. As adults filed into the room, I was caught in an agonizing silence, my heart racing like a drum. This was it. They were going to expose my little game. I thought of all those harmless words I tossed around. It was nothing compared to the danger that now lurked around me. It seemed my grand scheme would blow up in my face. Just when I was about to break under the pressure, as a lesson would have it, I stumbled across a turn of events that wove together the very ending of my saga. Eugene's mother had been in attendance, and as the whispers surged around the room, she raised her hand. "My son is struggling, and I firmly believe Clara is not the problem. He has made choices that reflect his lack of diligence, regardless of what Clara has said. The tension in the room flickered, once again leaving her son wide-eyed with disbelief. The table was turned. Mrs. Thompson sputtered through her rehearsed words, and in that moment my heart sank further than I thought it could, and not because I felt guilty. Instead, all I could think was how to turn this around. I had made my bed, and now I had to lie in it. My steps toward revenge shifted, and soon I would have to face the music. It was not looking pretty. But then, amidst the rising tension that spread like wildfire, a lighter tone emerged. "But," the principal said, "even the label of the devil must come with consequences. Clara, despite your history with Eugene, bullying is not acceptable, but let us look into this collectively." It was as if a wave of understanding washed over me, and instead of shame, I felt a flicker of hope. In that moment of vulnerability, I envisioned a new strategy emerging, the plan of forgiveness and moving forward. In every little scheme I had concocted, I realized none of it led to genuine happiness. I longed for acceptance, even from Mrs. Thompson, as harsh as her judgment had been. As the discussions meandered through consequences and concerns, I stood firm, speaking out about the importance of addressing the bullying and fostering an understanding among us all in the class. I could hear one of my classmates murmur, "Maybe we can start over?" The awakening sunk in, and by the time the meeting wrapped up, I knew I needed to change the tone of my rebellion. In the weeks that followed, rather than fuel strife, I took to bridging the gaps. I initiated small talk with Eugene rather than pulling away. It was hard, and I worried the change was perhaps futile, but I persevered. I began to draw a line in the sand where I could bridge some of our differences. Slowly but surely, that line began to blur, and a tentative friendship began to form. I let go of the notion that being the devil was part of my identity. Instead, I forged ahead into acceptance, revealing to Mrs. Thompson that I was more than just a label defined by my relationships with others. Now, faster than I could process, I found myself sitting in Mrs. Thompson's class with a built-in support system constructed from the ashes of what once tore us apart. The tension dissipated like smoke in the air, and every day was a testament to how far I had come. I learned that sometimes the most fitting revenge is not what you might expect. It's the ability to rise above anger and frustration. In the end, I found relief. It was a slow and tough journey, but in replacing spite with resilience, I carved my new story. One where Clara Wilkins, no longer deemed the devil, began to shine brightly once again, no longer caught in torment, but rather basking in the warmth of hope and newfound friendships.